take a look at our last famous Ozarker. And I don't know if we saved the best to last, but he's kind of a neat, famous guy. The mustache itself is worth saving him from. The last guy we had, Bill Doolan, had the big, 19th century mustache, and this guy has got the little pencil-thin mustache. Anybody know who this is? What do you think he does? You're a pretty good guesser. He's not a filmmaker, but he does have a prominent role in films.
He almost looks like Walt Disney.
Millie's she's got it today. I don't know what it is. This is not Walt Disney, but this is a guy named Buddy Baker. And Buddy Baker was Walt Disney's musical director. Yeah. Yeah. That's some pretty good guessing, Millie. Yeah, Walt. He was from Springfield, graduated from what was then Southwest Baptist College, now Southwest Baptist University in Bolivar, and had a very successful career as a music director in Hollywood, mostly with the Walt Disney Company. He scored several of the Disney movies. If you were my age, you would remember some of them because a lot of them were the Disney movies when I was a kid, like the Apple Dumpling Gang. Anybody ever seen that one? With Don Knotts and Tim Conway in it, probably about 40 years old now. What else? The Shaggy DA. Does anybody remember that one? Probably about the same era. The Fox and the Hound animated show. And there were some other ones as well. He did most of the Winnie the Pooh films from early days and TV shows. And he also composed a lot of the music for the Disneyland and Disney World theme parks. And some of it is still in use. I believe if you've ever been to the haunted house at Disney World or Disneyland, I think he did the theme music for the haunted house and some of the Epcot stuff at Disney World. And but a pretty busy guy from here in Springfield, Buddy Baker. I bet nobody had ever heard of Buddy Baker, had you? Yeah. Well, now you have, so it's good we're learning who Buddy Baker was. Okay, and we don't have a word of the day. We've got our Ozarks pronunciation guide. And this is just a little, as I send you off out into the world with what little bit of information you have about the Ozarks. Some of you are natives and you won't need this all that much, although as the semester has taught me, you can always use some touching up on your Ozarkness. So this can help you out a little bit. And those of you who aren't natives, just some tips on how to talk like a genuine Ozarker. The first one is obvious. Never pronounce the G on anything that ends in ing. That's kind of for populist talk in general. If you want to sound like the people, you never pronounce the G. Change the A to Y on the end of most words that end in A. That's just a necessity for the rural Ozarks, so that soda pop becomes sody pop. And you're from Nixie instead of Nixa. Some of the old timers, there are probably still some old timers around who say Nixie. They do. Yeah. I planted my okra last week. Hopefully it'll be up in another week or so. We'll see what happens there. And change the OW to ER at the end of words. So window becomes winder. Fellow becomes feller. Yeah. And just anything that ends in an OW, pretty much you can turn to ER. Now this is one that a lot of people from the South or from the Ozarks don't really get. I mean, I don't ever pronounce words that end in EN or IN any differently. They all sound the same to me. so that, a pen that you stick with is the same as a pen you write with, and the way I say it. Mispronounced vowel sounds. My grandpa was a master at this. Every vowel sound, basically, he mispronounced it in some way. And you find old-time Ozarkers often avoided short vowel sounds in favor of long vowel sounds. So in a word like calves, it would be pronounced caves. Has anybody ever heard that one? If you lived on a farm in the Ozarks, you might occasionally hear that one. But I know on our farm when I was a kid, my grandpa never had calves; he always had caves, and that was just how he pronounced it. And eggs becomes eggs.
Say it again.
Eggs. Yeah. How many eggs makes a dozen?
Eggs.
Yeah, instead of eggs. Yeah.
How would you say dogs? How would you say dogs? Do you say dogs? Or do you say
No, dogs is one that you can. Yeah, it's a dog. But the way people in the South and most of the Ozarks say dog is different. We don't say dog. It's dog. Daug.
Yeah.
Dog.
Like
Yeah.
four. People don't say four around here. They say fur.
Fur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to the store for some eggs.
Yeah.
That
Right.
always makes me
Yeah. And fur can also be far.
Fire.
Yeah. How far was that?
fire.
Not yet. Well, we're getting to that one. That's on the next page. There's 2 pages. You don't just go out there and start pronouncing stuff all willy-nilly. You got to know what you're talking about. So there are 2 pages of rules here. If I'm going to turn you loose, here's what you're talking about. Avoid long eyes so that fire becomes far. In the Ozarks, fire is far. A tire is a tar. You know what I'm talking about. You get a flat tar.
No, we don't talk that.
Yeah, you do. You're from Ava. You talk like that. Quit. These people will still like you. Don't deny your heritage. Yeah. And I know south of Ava, around Squars. Yeah. Well, we've already established that Gainesville apparently has really gotten uptown since the last time I was there. But so wire becomes war. I remember one time I was on a college bowl team or a quiz bowl team, whatever you call it in college, and my roommate was on the team with me. One of the smartest guys you would ever meet, but he was like me. He was a farm kid from North Arkansas, and the answer to one of the questions in this quiz bowl was Richard Pryor. You guys, some of you remember Richard Pryor, the comedian, maybe the greatest comedian of all time. And my friend, buzzes in and says, Richard Pryor. That was his answer, Richard Pryor. And the guy who's reading the questions was from Boston, not the Boston Mountains, but Boston, Massachusetts. And he kind of looks at him like, the Richard's right, but I don't know what in the world you said after that. And somebody kind of intercepted. I think it was me. I think I said, he means Pryor. Let me translate for my friend here. But yeah, Richard Pryor. So what do you think Marn would be short for? It's a name. It's a proper name. Myron. Yeah. If your parents unfortunately named you Myron, in the Ozarks you would be Marn, or if they named you Byron, you'd be Barn. It's a lot easier that way. Who needs 2 syllables? Just shorten it down. So what's an arn? An iron? Yeah, you iron your clothes with an arn. So you're getting the hang of it. Yeah, that's and yeah, you shorten words down when you can, so you omit those syllables. I remember one of my favorite words that my grandpa always said was fard instead of forehead. Hit that cow in the fard, that kind of thing. Millie's She just doesn't understand this at all, do you? And wheelbar or wheelbear, it depends on what part of the region you're in for wheelbarrow. And this is one of my favorites. And this doesn't happen much anymore because most people since World War II have a lot of times changed the pronunciation of their name to match the spelling. But if you were able to transport yourself back 100 years and just wander around the rural Ozarks, you would find that many people seemingly mispronounced their names. They didn't always pronounce their names the way that their names were spelled. And these are just some examples that I can think of from back home, the way that some old-timers pronounced their names when I was a kid. In some cases, they still do. But like the name Reynolds was pronounced Runnels. And if you didn't know what they were saying, you wouldn't have a clue how to spell the name. But that's Cochran was pronounced Callhorn. How you get Callhorn out of Cochran, I don't know, but that's just how the old-timers pronounced it. This one is still pronounced that way. I know some people named Daddle. They pronounce their name Daddle, but it's spelled Dowdle. And then we've talked about this before. Even the prominent Campbell family here in Springfield, the one that Campbell is named after, up until a couple of generations ago, would have pronounced their name Camel, or their ancestors would have pronounced their name Camel without the B in it. I think we've mentioned the Camel 66 trucking company that had the camel mascot on it because that's how the name was pronounced. But here's some other examples. Buckhannon instead of Buchanan. Mathis instead of Matthews. I know a family who, up until a generation or so ago, pronounced their name Mathis, but it's spelled like we would say Matthews, and some of these others down here. And just a couple of years ago, the University of Arkansas had a linebacker on the football team who spelled his name this way and pronounced it that way. So his family was following that old thing where you turn the A's into I's or E's or Y's on the end of it. So Huckabee becomes Huckabee. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people got confused over that one. And the last rule, of course, is never say the word pronunciation. That would give you away as a non-Ozarker, right? Just say how we say words. Yeah, no, don't say pronunciation. All right, so that's your Ozark rules. All right, we know that extractive industry has long been important in the Ozarks. We talked a little bit about the importance of the timber industry and the mining industry in the Ozarks. And for the most part today, where the timber industry is still important in the Ozarks, and where mining is still important in the Ozarks, it's the same places where it has always been important, or at least been important in the region for 100 years or more. And the timber and lumber business is not as large as it was 100 years ago during the boom period, because that 100 years ago period was living off of virgin timber, and it's been long gone. And what you have now are smaller businesses. In some cases, you have corporate timber industries involved in the Ozarks, but a lot of cases you have just small mom and pop sawmills and shops of different kinds, handle factories and pallet factories and things like that spread around the region. Even in some places, charcoal is still a big thing. Around Salem, Missouri, there's still an important charcoal industry. In northeast Oklahoma, and you can see the leftovers of the charcoal industry in a lot of places in the Missouri Ozarks. Missouri used to be a major charcoal producer. It still produces lots of charcoal, but not quite on the scale that it used to. Branson used to have a big charcoal factory.
There's a Kingsford charcoal just north of Rolla still.
Yeah. It's still a big business in some places, and you may have seen the charcoal. I can't remember what they call them. The little huts that they actually make the charcoal in. They're sort of distinctive looking, little kind of rounded things, usually metal, kind of long metal buildings that are kind of rounded on top, and you still see a lot of them. A lot of them are not in use anymore. Yeah, I think it's just, you can kind of see it, it's north of town, I believe, in kind of a little holler there. Yeah. What's one of the big charcoal companies partially got started in Branson. I don't think it's Kingsford. What's another big charcoal company? Royal Oak. That one, Royal Oak. There was a Royal Oak factory down there, and the man who started that, whose name was Keeter. If you've ever been, does anybody go to the School of the Ozarks? Ever been to the College of the Ozarks? There's a Keeter Center down there, named after that family. He was in the charcoal business. That's how he made his money, was in the charcoal business. Yeah. So charcoal was a pretty big business. Again, it's declined a little bit in the last generation or so, but still pretty big. And then of course you've got your mining. The new lead belt opened after the old lead belt played out, and the new lead belt is over in the over sort of on the other side of Salem, Missouri, back out in that direction, the Viburnum and some of those towns over in there. It's isolated, and you don't really drive by it going to anywhere to get to those mining operations in the new lead belt. And then down in Arkansas, one of the big mineral booms of the last 10 years or so has been drilling for natural gas. And that seems to have eased up a little bit in the Arkansas Ozarks, but it's still underway down there. And that's caused a lot of change in the very southern part of the Ozarks.
Is it called like fracking?
Yeah, fracking.
Oh yeah, there are all kinds of heat on that.
And it's not just here. I mean, it's going on in Pennsylvania and West Virginia and around the country, and you hear a lot of news reports and read a lot of news about environmental issues. And one of the issues they were having in Arkansas a few years ago was they discovered that the fracking, or part of the fracking process, was triggering earthquakes. And so, I mean, you know, you're talking about some pretty serious stuff. When I felt a couple of them, and my house in Arkansas is not anywhere near where they drill for this natural gas. I mean, that's, you know, there's some pretty.
Isn't that happening in Oklahoma too?
Probably is, yeah.
It's probably happening
Anywhere they've got these shale fields that have natural gas in them, they're fracking, and I don't know the science behind it, but they kind of dig down and then they dig sideways. And it's this
Like actually
hor-
breaking of the shale that like releases the gas.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And then they've known for years that natural gas was down there, but it's only been within the last 10 or 15 years that they've got the technology, and it's efficient, you know, financially efficient enough to actually go down there and get it. Because you can look back at, I remember doing research once, and there were all these oil companies, this little remote place in the Arkansas Ozarks that's being overrun now by these natural gas companies. All these oil companies were down there staking claims and buying up mineral rights and stuff like that, because they could read a geological map too, and they knew the shale was under there. They just didn't have an economical way to get it out of the ground back then. But it's really boomed in the last 10 years in Arkansas and in lots of other places around the United States. Yeah, I guess that's part of what's going on maybe in the Dakotas. You know, they've had a lot of expansion up there, oil drilling and stuff. Here's another homemade map here, and you can see what this map indicates is counties that are the most dependent on what's called the forest products industry, on timber and lumber production, sawmilling, that kind of stuff. And not surprisingly, The ones who are most dependent are the ones down here in the old pine belt of southeast Missouri, where the virgin pine forest was being cut 130 years ago. Counties like Shannon and Reynolds and Carter County, and then the surrounding counties are pretty heavily dependent. And even as far west, well, this is Dade County, and I'm not exactly sure what the story there is, but even over here to Douglas and Ozark County, you have some dependence on forest products. But in those places, it's going to be mainly hardwood and not pine. And in most of the places in the Ozarks today, it's hardwood, but there is still some pine forest cutting that goes on in southeast Missouri. So nowhere near the boom times of 100 years ago, but still an important industry in a lot of places. Now, one of the major changes that's happened since the World War II era, and going back a little bit before that in some cases, is the increasing land ownership and involvement of the federal government in the Ozarks, from the establishment of national forests to national parks to military installations. And we've already talked about the building of all the dams that the Army Corps of Engineers built around the region that's helped change the face of the Ozarks in many ways by creating all these man-made lakes. And of course today we've got thousands of acres in both Arkansas and Missouri that are under the control of the National Forest Service. In Arkansas, it's the Ozark National Forest. In Missouri, they're all in the Mark Twain National Forest. And we'll look at a map just in a minute that shows you where these are. It's not one contiguous forest in either places. It's little patchy forests. And the Arkansas National Forest, or the Ozark National Forest, started being formed in the early 1900s. The Mark Twain National Forest started, I believe, in the 1930s and was kind of slowly built up as the government bought more and more farmland from farmers and then let it revert back to forest land and then managed it as forest land. Conservation, not preservation, that's what the National Forest Service does. What's the difference between conservation and preservation?
They cut the timber, they regrowth and all that.
Right. In the national forests, they're not preserved. They're not meant to be pristine and keep away from us. They manage the timber resources, as Millie says, and allow selective cutting on them. They don't allow clear cutting or anything like that, but the National Forest Service manages the cutting of the forests for price. People who come in and cut, pay a rate to the National Forest Service. And as opposed to a situation like a national park or something where you have preservation, where the forests are not cut and you sort of leave them as they are. And nowadays, the National Forest Service even does things like controlled burns. For years and years and years, the Forest Service insisted that the old Ozark tradition, which goes even farther back to an old Indian tradition of burning the woods and burning the prairies and stuff, was a no-no, that it was destructive to the environment. And as with so many things, you give it enough years and all of a sudden we switch our view, and nowadays the National Forest Service even does many of its own controlled burns because there are some benefits, ecological benefits to burns that we didn't appreciate 50 or 60 years ago that they know now as these forests have developed over the years. Of course, you've got the Ozark National Scenic Riverways that we talked about in southeast Missouri, Current River and Jack's Fork River, land that's owned and maintained by the national government, National Park Service, not the Forest Service. And the Buffalo National River, this is a picture of the buffalo with the hog farm looming somewhere 5 miles away. I'm not sure exactly where it's going to be. And then, of course, one of the largest government projects in the Ozarks of the 20th century was the creation of Fort Leonard Wood, and outside of Waynesville, mostly in Pulaski County, Missouri. A massive undertaking during World War II, creating this military installation used for training troops, and it's still a very active Army fort today. And just as with a lot of these other things, with Fort Leonard Wood, a lot of farmers were forced to sell their land and were moved off to other places. And you got a big off-limits military installation up there now in the middle of the Ozarks. And of course, we talked about the dams built by the Army Corps of Engineers. So there has been, even though a lot of people think of the Ozarks as a place where you can kind of get away from the government and get off in the backwoods and live your life unfettered and all that kind of stuff, just like anywhere in America, there's plenty of government influence, state and federal, in this case, government influence. And here's a map showing where the forest, you can see the Mark Twain forest, the puzzle pieces just scattered all around southern Missouri. And there's even another piece that we can't see that they cut out for some reason. It's up farther up close to the Missouri River. And this is the Ozark National Forest here, one little segment of it, and then the big chunks. This is all Boston Mountains territory. And if you...
How reliable is that map?
I'm not sure. It's pretty close. Yeah, I didn't make that map. I will make that statement right off the bat. I just make the homemade maps with the black and the gray on them. That's my specialty. Right, when they started, they didn't start until the 20th century, start building these national forests. And when they, the first idea was to take land that hasn't yet been claimed by anybody, land that's still in the public domain. And some of this land, like down in the Ouachita National Forest, some of this land was still in the public domain. It was so mountainous, so hilly that it had just never been claimed by anybody, never even been homesteaded. So no one had even claimed it as free land. And then when they started doing that, they turned that public domain land into national forest. Then is when they started gradually buying up parcels of privately owned land around that, and sometimes pressuring people to sell, and sometimes people just, the land's not any good anyway, we might as well sell this. And gradually the national forests get bigger and bigger. And the same thing happens in Missouri as well. You start with land that was never claimed, and then gradually, build it up by paying for land that's in the vicinity. Yeah. And that's national forest land almost naturally tends to be rugged, hilly, sort of not very good for traditional agriculture. And that's kind of the thing. You can have, at one time there were massive forests, say in the Delta, on what now is very, very fertile farmland down there, because they cut the trees down, drain the swamps, all that stuff. But for the most part, these forested areas, even when you cut down the trees in the Ozarks, they're still rocky, rugged hillsides and things like that, and they're not great for agriculture. And that's part of the reason the national government tried to take as much of this land in as possible to get it out of agricultural production, to prevent things like erosion, hillsides washing away and stuff like that. Yeah, if you could, and the thing about much of this land was at one time privately owned and farmed. It would probably surprise most of us to drive through national forest land today if there was some magic way they could show us on a map what the land used to look like what land was farmed. And it would probably surprise you some of the rugged country that was farmed at one point. And if you really looked, you could probably see some of the scars of that. Big ditches that had eroded that had now been kind of camouflaged by second growth timber and underbrush and all that kind of stuff. All right, here's here's the northern part of the Mark Twain. And so some of that goes north of the interstate.
No, does that say Cedar Creek?
Yeah, Cedar Creek.
Yeah, we live like on Cedar Creek.
Okay,
so
that
it's
part.
right there.
Yeah. And you can see the rest of these little jigsaw puzzle pieces scattered around the region. And then this one's a little harder to tell what's going on. This is actually the state line, Missouri-Arkansas state line. And this is the Ozark National Forest, a little bit closer view. And part of the Ozark National Forest is on the south side of the Arkansas River down here. We'll look at just a little bit at the political situation in the Ozarks, which is really interesting, especially here in the 21st century, as the Ozarks seems to be getting more and more Republican. I don't know that we're getting more and more conservative. You might say we've always been conservative, but our republicanism is starting to catch up with our conservatism in many ways. And now I left Arkansas off this map, or I didn't fill in any of the Arkansas counties, and I'll explain what the colors are in a minute, because Arkansas doesn't make it nearly as easy to find out what political affiliation local county elected officials are. For Missouri, that's very easy to find that information out, and I looked and I looked and I looked all over the internet, and I just couldn't find a good place to gather that information for Arkansas. But what these colors are, and I did this back the first time that I taught this class 2 years ago, back in the spring of 2011, the 2010 midterm election had just happened. And what I did was I went in and I looked at the county officials, county clerk and treasurer and commissioners and all that kind of stuff for all of the Missouri Ozarks counties, and looked at the political affiliation, what political party they were from, the ones who had got elected. And the red counties are the ones that were solidly Republican. And as you would expect, Southwest Missouri, solidly Republican for generations here in Southwest Missouri. The blue ones were solidly Democratic, or Democratic Party. And the green ones were the ones who were pretty evenly split between Democrats and Republicans in local offices. Now, I didn't go by presidential elections or anything like that. If I had a presidential election map, practically the entire Ozarks would be red, because for years and years, the Ozarks has been voting for Republican presidential candidates, even at the same time that many places in the Ozarks still elect local Democratic Party candidates to local county offices. And so it's a pretty good indication of the political situation in the Ozarks for the last few generations, where you had solidly red Southwest Missouri, mostly blue Southeast Missouri, and then this kind of middle ground in between where there was a two-party system on the local level. For up until recently, and for the most part, most of North Arkansas would still be blue on the county level. For instance, the county that I grew up in still has all Democrats in local county elected offices, though the county votes overwhelmingly Republican in presidential elections, and probably even in state elections for like U.S. Senator and stuff like that. So often voting patterns don't always make sense in that way. Voting for local candidates in the minds of many people in the Ozarks is a very different thing than voting for national candidates, especially in these blue county areas, because most of these places would have voted firmly against Barack Obama last fall at the same time that they're electing Democratic Party members to local offices. And my friend who lives in Jefferson City refers to this as the Highway 63 divide, the political divide in the Ozarks. I think I've got the right highway. 63 is the one that goes through Houston and up to Raleigh, right?
Yes.
And yeah, it comes down, 63 comes down through here. And he always, even before I actually sat down and made the map, he used to talk about the Highway 63 divide. To the west, you have Republican territory. To the east, you have Democratic territory in Missouri. And it's pretty, it's pretty accurate. In recent years, what you've seen, and I need to go back and look after last fall's election. I need to update this map and see if any of these blue counties have become greener or maybe even red, because there's been really a resurgence of Republicanism even in traditionally Democratic areas of the Ozarks. And one of the things that happened just this past fall is, for the first time since Reconstruction, right after the Civil War, the state of Arkansas went red, meaning that a majority of the members to the state House of Representatives and the state Senate in the state of Arkansas are now Republicans. First time in way over 100 years that that's happened. And Missouri still very red, Arkansas becoming redder. And of course, some of our most prominent politicians on the national scene in recent years have been Republicans. The prominent politicians from the Ozarks, like John Ashcroft. He was the Attorney General under, I think, in the first administration of George W. Bush, and has connections here in Springfield. Ashcroft, conservative Republican. His father, I believe, was the president of Evangel College. Is that right?
Something like this.
And yeah, I know he's Assembly of God connection. Strong connection to the Assembly of God Church. But John Ashcroft, very prominent. Tim Hutchinson, most of you don't remember Tim Hutchinson, but he was the first Republican U.S. Senator elected from Arkansas after Reconstruction. He was elected back in the 90s and was defeated after one term in office, but not necessarily because of his party. I think he had some personal issues. Women issues. That politicians tend to stumble into that kind of stuff. Right. And Roy Blunt, of course, he's back in office now. He's in the Senate. And Roy Blunt is from here in Southwest Missouri. And I think has a master's degree from Missouri State. There are basically, not counting Oklahoma, and I hate to keep leaving Oklahoma out of this, but I haven't been counting them half the semester, so why start now, right? Not counting northeast Oklahoma, which I'm not sure what congressional district that falls into, but there are basically 5 representatives in Congress who represent all or parts of the Ozarks. 3 in Missouri and 2 in Arkansas. And in Missouri, you've got District 4 comes down from almost Kansas City and then it comes out all the way down to Webster County. District 4 does. Most of Webster County is in District 4 and a couple other Ozark counties. And then you got District 7, which is where we are here in Southwest Missouri. And District 8 covers all of Southeast Missouri and South Central Missouri, both the Boot Heel and the Ozarks part. And then in Arkansas, you got District 3, which is Northwest Arkansas and Western Arkansas. And District 1 covers the rest of the Arkansas Ozarks and then a lot of the Delta. And all 5 of those representatives today are Republicans. So all of the congressmen and women representing the Ozarks today in the House of Representatives are Republicans. You've got Vicky Hartzler from District 4, Billy Long, from here in District 7. Joanne Emerson just resigned earlier this year from District 8. She had been in office there for years and years, and she resigned to take a national job, and they're actually having the special election to replace her next month, about a month from now. A Republican will probably win that election, but I don't know that for sure. And then in Arkansas, you got Steve Womack in the Northwest and Rick Crawford in the Northeast, and both of those are newly elected Republican officers. As a matter of fact, Rick Crawford, who is the representative for my home county down in Arkansas, is the first Republican elected to that office since Reconstruction to that district's office. So quite a story of the Republicanization of the Ozarks in recent years, where the influence of Southwest Missouri, which traditionally has been the strongest Republican part of the Ozarks, seems to have kind of spread out to the rest of the Ozarks. But one of these days I'll get the entire map color-coded when Arkansas cooperates and lets people get to their statistics without calling each county courthouse to find out what your officers are. All right. So from politics to drug busts, and there is a connection because Carter County's former sheriff, Tommy Adams, who I'm guessing was a Democrat, I don't know, that was one of our blue counties, I believe, was just sentenced to 10 years in prison last summer, as was one of the deputies from Carter County. His sentence was related to methamphetamine charges, and I think there may have been some weapons charges in there as well. But the first time that I taught this class 2 years ago, he got arrested, I think, that semester in the spring of 2011 when he was arrested on a drug bust. And that was a national story when a sheriff of a county got arrested for meth charges, and especially when the county just happened to be in Missouri, the meth capital of the world. That was something that was going to make headlines. But for most of the last 12 or 15 years, Missouri has led the nation in meth lab busts. We continue. I think there was one year when California beat us, but they got a lot more people than we do. We still had them per capita, I'm sure, and so it's been a major issue. Now this map shows you, this is just raw numbers. This is not per capita statistics and just raw numbers, the number of meth busts, and you can see that suburban St. Louis tends to lead the way, but there's a lot more people up there and a lot more people to bust than there are. But you can see some down in here. There's some dark counties where there have been quite a few busts as well. And here's the little thing. But it's one of those. And I don't know how to explain Missouri's story. Why Missouri? I guess you could sugarcoat it and say our law enforcement is much better at making busts. I don't know. We've talked about the Branson area. I don't know if it's Taney County or Branson has recently passed a rule or ordinance requiring you to have a prescription to get pseudoephedrine or ephedrine. So you can't get it over the counter anymore, and that's what they're looking at here as well, as possibly doing that. And then the other question had to do, Millie seems to be really interested in the manufacture of methamphetamine here. But there are different methods of making it, and I'm sure that your nearest internet portal will tell you all you need to know about how to make. I'm guessing there's probably all kinds of instructions. Yeah. You need to do it from the library or something, right? From a public. Yeah, they were saying that I was listening to the radio a couple of days ago, and they were talking about that maybe these Boston bombers, the Boston Marathon bombers, had learned how to make bombs off the internet or something, and you can just anything's out there pretty much, and so, but you've got to start there. I know that it's a dangerous thing. I know at least one person who had a meth lab blow up on him, and as if that weren't bad enough, then he got to recuperate in jail and then spend a couple years in prison. After the recuperation. So it is a very dangerous sort of thing.
But obviously,
What Winter's Bone? The movie, that's what are they? He snorts it in there, I don't remember if anybody shoots it up or smokes it or anything like that. But it's and of course, one of the things that has so closely identified Missouri with the meth industry the last couple of years was the success of the 2010 film Winter's Bone, which was based on the earlier novel by Daniel Woodrell. It was very true to the novel, and the novel is very much focused on this kind of meth subculture in south central Missouri. The film was actually made here in southwest Missouri, but a very powerful novel and a powerful film that unfortunately probably a lot of people watched and interpreted as a documentary of life in the Ozarks. I say that partially in jest, but I think a lot of people did see that. A lot of L.A., New York coastal people saw that and thought, well, that's how life is in the Ozarks. And it is there's a certain subset of the Ozarks for whom life is like that, but many of you commented in your journals, those of you who wrote about Winter's Bone and things like that, usually made the comment that most people in the Ozarks, as we know, don't live like that and aren't involved in that subculture. But the thing about the novel is the novel is a work of art, and it doesn't have to be a documentary. Daniel Woodrell doesn't have to try to represent the full spectrum of the Ozarks. It would be much less interesting if he did have a chapter or two on the accountants and school teachers of West Plains. That was, who wants to read about that? Unless they're doing meth, they're not very interesting. And so they, that's just part of it. And so I really like the novel and I really like the movie. But I do know that some people who aren't familiar with the Ozarks saw that as a statement of true life in the Ozarks, and that bothers people from the Ozarks. Yeah.
like all the TV programs that are coming out with the hillbilly thing.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah, the reality TV just kind of splash of hillbilly life that we seem to be enjoying right now. That's fortunately, I don't think they've come out with. Well, I wouldn't say they haven't come out with the Meth Chronicles or something. They seem to have everything else. They do have the Moonshiners, but Cops. That's basically the meth show, isn't it? From the other side, that's quite a show. But that's one of the big issues, law enforcement issues, other 21st century issues. Certainly, environmental issues will continue to be important in the Ozarks, whether it's environmental issues having to do with agriculture, like the proposed hog farm near the Buffalo River, or old mining areas that are no longer mined but are sort of pits of muck and refuse that are ugly and potentially hazardous to people's health. You've got lots of lots of often hidden environmental issues in the Ozarks unless you actually go to these places. You know, if you just drive through, everything's scenic and often pristine looking, but maybe not so much behind the scenes. And even with like the Buffalo National River and the Current River and these different rivers, there are environmental issues there as more and more people float the rivers and leave trash. And that's something that has always been a problem for people who promote tourist use of these places, but at the same time sort of regret the heavy usage of these places because of the noise pollution and the regular pollution that comes about. Now, one of the main issues here in the Ozarks, just like everybody else, what is our economic future? Where will future generations get their jobs? What will the jobs be? What will the industry be here? Will we all be working service jobs, you know, working in the tourist industry at some point as we outsource our manufacturing jobs increasingly, as mines shut down and you know, potentially environmental standards continue to chip away at that. That's a big issue, and you know, I don't really know what the future of the Ozarks is from that standpoint. If it will be a place that continues to grow with these Fortune 500 companies, or you know, or if it will come to resemble more the vast majority of Ozarks counties that don't have these Fortune 500 companies, and where poverty is very high, higher than national standards, and where jobs are scarce, and where increasingly large numbers of people live off of public support of one kind or another. You know, that seems to be an increasing issue in the Ozarks, especially in the rural and small town Ozarks, is the increasing dependency on federal programs, disability programs and other federal programs. This is if I can get this to work, we'll take a look at this map. And what you will notice, this is a 2009 map from the New York Times. It is as you can see here, they call it a government benefits, or you might call it government dependency map that measures people's dependency on things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, disability. And you come down, you can see the darker the counties are, and this is a nationwide map of counties. The darker the counties are, the heavier the dependence is on these federal programs. And you can see here in the Ozarks, it's pretty dark in there. You've definitely got one of the national clusters of heavy dependency is in the Ozarks, and especially in south central, southeastern, and north central Arkansas. And that's not coincidentally the part of the Ozarks that tended to be blank on all of our maps. You know, there's not a whole lot going on in some of these counties. And you've got, one of the things you can do if you pull this up on Blackboard, you can scroll over the counties and it will tell you, here's Ripley County, Missouri, one of the poorest counties in Missouri. Over 44.5% of all county income is from these various sources. And then you can, there's some way to go in here. Oh, you can go over here and change the map a little bit to reflect unemployment, veterans, Medicaid, that kind of stuff. And
How do we stack up in Green County?
let's see. Yeah, quite low, less than 20%. So you can see, I mean, we know just from being in the Ozarks that there is a huge discrepancy between a prosperous area like Greene County and a not prosperous area like so much of southeast Missouri, the poorest part of the Ozarks, and these are statistics that kind of reflect that dependence on government programs over there. Here's a couple poor ones up here too: Benton County, Hickory County.
What is the first figure of per capita income?
It says all transfer income per capita. Yeah, that's the and they're what they call transfer income is basically government program income, and that's how much of it is shelled out per capita, and that's a lot of over $11,000. That's a lot of.
7 something in Greene County. 7,000.
Yeah, yeah, and of course now keep in mind we've already talked about the prevalence of retirees in the Ozarks, and that can certainly skew the numbers because there are lots and lots of retired people who depend on Social Security or get Social Security even if they don't depend on it in the Ozarks, and that's going to show up on there as well. But then of course, you've got some very, very prosperous, where Walmart is headquartered, Benton County, Arkansas, you can see there, less than 15%. So very little dependence on the government there. Neighboring Washington County, just 15.5%. But there's Ozark County, over 40%. Wright County. But it's just if you like maps and you like stats, then you can go to town on this thing for days.
Head on down to New Mexico where it's really, really dark.
Okay.
Would those be Native Americans down there?
Yeah, more than likely. I don't know where reservations are in New Mexico from one place to another, but what you find generally on this map, sort of the 3 problem areas, if you want to call them that, you've got some counties in the south that have very large African American populations, like Delta counties. There are several of those that are extremely poor. You've got counties that have large percentages of Native Americans that are very poor, and then you've got your poor white counties in the Ozarks and Appalachia. And those are especially in rural America, those are the problem areas on a map like this. Yeah, see, you've got, here's Sierra County. And I don't know really enough about that. But yeah, in Kentucky, you've got Leslie County is one of the really poor ones. You're talking about coal mining country over in here. And then down here in the Mississippi Delta, heavy population of retirees, older folks in the Ozarks that are dependent on Social Security, especially in north central Arkansas. That's my home county there, very high percentage of Social Security. So that link is up there if you want to check that out. But that's about all the time we have, and we've covered most of these issues. We got about 5 minutes left, and I'll be happy to entertain questions about what we've talked about today, about 21st century issues in the Ozarks. Not too much about the future of the Ozarks because I don't really know. I'm a historian. I don't deal with the future all that much. The past is much more interesting.